What if the weapon mocked as a toy became the tool that saved the free world? Inside a dim armory in Springfield, Massachusetts, 1932. The clang of steel echoes like church bells, of war not yet begun. John Garand wipes sweat from his brow, holding a rifle that no one believes in. His hands tremble not from doubt, but from exhaustion. Years of rejection wrapped around blueprints smudged with hope. A toy rifle, they sneer. No soldier will use such nonsense, yet Garand only whispers to the weapon, they will. Outside, snow falls over factory roofs, while the radio hums of unrest overseas. Truth feels fragile, like steel before tempering. Behind locked doors, Colonel Haskins watches through glass, clipboard in hand, judgment ready, justice delayed. The rifle glints beneath flickering lights, as if waiting for history to wake. Somewhere far away, thunder rolls like distant artillery. The world doesn't know it yet, but this so-called toy is about to rewrite every rule of war. Morning fog clings to the windows of the War Department. John Garand stands before a panel of officers as his blueprints are spread like accusations across the table. Haskins' voice cuts through the air, sharp and final. This rifle is unfit for service. The words hit harder than bullets. Garand, calm but unbending, explains his mechanism once more. The gas-operated cycle, the precision of timing, but bureaucracy has no ear for conviction. Outside, soldiers march in rhythm, their bolt-action rifles slamming like judgment. Inside, silence devours him. Eleanor's words echo in his mind. Truth takes time. He gathers his blueprints, folds them with trembling patience, and leaves. In the corridor, sunlight leaks through the blinds, striping his face with light and shadow, half faith, half despair. In the quiet of Sunyo Animaende, Anglorishior, Emaquirisen, Ishwan and Nisor, he works to workshod, he kranaha, he, each sound a heartbeat of hope. He makes tiny adjustments, shaving metal, aligning springs, testing tension. Sweat drips, his back aches, but his focus burns steady. Every failed test has taught him something. Every mockery another note in his symphony of precision. The radio nearby crackles with distant news. Nations arming, alliances shifting, the storm brewing. He lifts the rifle again, breathes deeply, and fires. This time the mechanism cycles smoothly, a perfect rhythm of motion and fire. The echo fills the room like a hymn. His eyes close, not in triumph but relief. Somewhere, justice begins to whisper. News spreads quietly through the armory. Garand's rifle has passed preliminary trials. The same officers who mocked him now walk the halls in uneasy silence. Colonel Haskins stands at his window, watching soldiers train in the snow, a rare thought crossing his mind. Perhaps the man was right. Garand, meanwhile, eats lunch alone at his bench, unaware of shifting tides. The world outside turns faster, louder, darker. Yet inside, one man's quiet persistence hums like a steady drum beat against time's march. Night again at the armory. The world sleeps, but Garand does not. The new prototype lies ready on his bench, glistening under a single lamp. He checks every screw, every spring, as if preparing a child for its first breath. Eleanor's letter rests beside him, opened now. Her words steady him. What you build is not for glory, but for the right to stand free. He places the letter inside his coat, takes one final look at his creation, and exhales. Outside, the wind howls, carrying echoes of future battlefields. The door closes softly behind him. The world does not know it yet, but the sound of justice has just been chambered. The winter of 1936 bites through the testing fields like a living thing. Rows of soldiers stand waiting, rifles slung, breath visible in the cold air. John Garand watches from the edge, his prototype, the final one, ready for its fate. Colonel Haskins calls for the test, his tone steady, but his eyes uncertain. One soldier, young and curious, loads the weapon, his hands trembling slightly. The first shot cracks through the silence, then another, then another. No jams, no hesitation. Only rhythm, precision, power. The echoes fade, replaced by stunned quiet. Haskins looks down at his clipboard, then at Garand. No words, just a slow nod. The air seems to hold its breath. For the first time, Garand allows himself a smile. Justice, silent and unannounced, has arrived in the form of steel and smoke. News spreads through the War Department like wildfire. The M1 Garand works. Engineers who once doubted him now scramble for credit, while bureaucrats rush to stamp approval papers. Garand, however, remains quiet. He sits in his small office, surrounded by blueprints and silence, reflecting not on triumph but on responsibility. To him, this is not victory, it's duty. Outside, the American flag ripples against the wind, no longer a distant symbol but a promise he helped secure. Haskins enters without ceremony, placing the folder on the table. "Congratulations, Mr. Garand," he says, voice softer than ever before. "You've changed the army." Garand nods faintly. "Let's hope it changes us too," he replies. By late 1937, production begins. The armory hums like a living engine. Thousands of workers, machines roaring, steel, forged into destiny. Eleanor visits for the first time, walking alongside her husband through the crowded floor. She sees what he has built. Not just rifles, but belief. "They laughed once," he says quietly. "Now they can't keep up." She smiles, touching his arm. "Truth doesn't need applause, John. It only needs time." Her words settle between the clatter of machines, a reminder that even progress must stay human. As she leaves, he looks over the assembly lines. Thousands of rifles shining beneath the light. The sound is deafening yet beautiful. A hymn to justice forged in iron. 1939. Europe burns. The world watches as nations fall under iron boots, and whispers of America's involvement grow louder. Inside a military conference room, generals argue about readiness, strategy, and cost. Garand stands silently at the far end, the lone civilian among them. When asked to speak, he says only, "The weapon is ready." "Are we?" The room falls silent. His question is not about guns. It's about courage. General Patton, fierce and unfiltered, rises. "Then give it to my men," he says. "Let's see if this thing can win wars." The decision is made. The M1 will go to battle. Justice leaves the workshop and walks into history. Months later, the first shipment of M1 rifles leaves the armory. Crates marked U.S. Army are loaded onto trains, bound for distant shores. Garand watches silently from the platform, hands in pockets, the whistle of the departing train echoing like a farewell hymn. Eleanor stands beside him, slipping her hand into his. "You've given them a chance," she whispers. "Now they'll have to fight for the rest." The smoke thickens, blending sky and earth into one gray horizon. He nods slowly. "Let's hope the world learns what it costs to be free." The camera lingers as the train vanishes, leaving only the echo of its horn and the distant hum of hope carried across oceans. The year is 1942. The beaches of North Africa blaze under merciless sun as American troops face their baptism of fire. Among them, Lieutenant Frank Keller grips his M1 Garand, heart pounding beneath desert dust. This is its first true test, not on paper, not in factories, but in chaos. Bullets scream, sand erupts, and fear claws at every man's throat. Keller steadies his breath, raises the rifle, and fires. Smooth, powerful, flawless. For a fleeting second, amid the roar of war, he feels something impossible. Trust, not just in the weapon, but in the hands that built it. As smoke rolls across the dunes, his voice cuts through the noise. "Keep firing, she won't let you down. The line surges forward, Garand's blazing, and somewhere across the ocean, John Garand pauses in his workshop, sensing that his creation has finally found its purpose. Back in Springfield, John Garand listens to the radio, broadcasting reports from the front. The announcer's voice trembles with pride. The American infantry carries a new weapon, the semi-automatic rifle that fires as fast as a man can aim. Garand sits in silence, head bowed. The world finally knows its name, but he feels no triumph. He sees not fame, but faces. Soldiers he'll never meet, trusting the precision of his hands. Eleanor enters quietly, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You gave them a chance," she whispers. He nods slowly. Now the world will decide what to do with it. On the other side of the world, Lieutenant Keller leads his unit through the ruins of a French village. Smoke and shattered glass surround them, the stench of war thick and bitter. He spots movement ahead. Enemy patrol. His men freeze. Keller signals silently, raises his Garand, and fires once. The echo rolls through the ruins. His men follow, disciplined, relentless. The rifle never falters. The battle ends in moments. As silence falls, Keller lowers the weapon and mutters, "It's more than a gun. It's a promise." He looks at the sky streaked with ashes, wondering if the man who built it could ever imagine this. Washington, 1943. General George S. Patton addresses a crowded room of reporters, his words sharp and booming. "The M1 Garand is the greatest battle implement ever devised." Applause erupts, flashing bulbs freezing his fierce grin. Garand, watching from the back, says nothing. His eyes glisten, not with pride, but with quiet disbelief that something built in struggle now fuels the defense of freedom. Haskins, standing beside him, leans in softly. "You were right all along," he murmurs. Garand only replies, "No, Colonel. The soldiers were." Night falls over the armory. Garand works alone, tuning a rifle not for war, but for memory. He moves with care, every motion deliberate, reverent. In the corner lies a telegram. Another report from the front, filled with numbers, victories, and names he'll never know. He sets down his tools, wipes his hands, and looks toward the window. Outside, rain falls gently against glass, washing the world in silver streaks. For the first time, he allows himself a whisper. Let it end soon. The rain keeps falling, as if the heavens answer with silence. June 6, 1944. The world holds its breath. The sea churns gray beneath a storm-heavy sky as landing craft slice through the waves toward Normandy. Lieutenant Frank Keller stands among his men, clutching his M1 Garand tight against his chest. Fear runs like electricity through every heartbeat. The ramp lowers, and chaos explodes. Sand, smoke, blood, and water crashing together. Keller fires into the storm, each shot steady, precise, alive. The rifle never falters. Around him, soldiers find rhythm in the madness, each man trusting the same promise of steel and faith. For a fleeting moment amid the thunder of war, the impossible happens. The tide turns. The rifle, once mocked as a toy, now leads the charge of history. Back in America, John Garand listens to the D-Day reports through the crackle of a radio in his silent workshop. His hands tremble as he turns the volume up. The announcer speaks of our boys pushing inland, rifles blazing. He closes his eyes, seeing the factory floor, the blueprints, the cold mornings of failure. Everything has led to this moment, yet pride mixes with grief, for he knows the price of victory is never clean. Eleanor enters quietly, her face pale but resolute. "I'll make it," she says. "Your work carried them." Garand looks at her with heavy eyes. "Let's pray they come home to tell me that." In France, the liberation pushes forward. Keller and his platoon move through hedgerows drenched in morning dew and danger. The enemy fights fiercely, yet something has shifted. The American advance no longer crawls, it surges. Keller reloads, shouts orders, and presses on. The Garand's metallic rhythm fills the air, echoing like a drumbeat of hope. Between bursts of gunfire, he kneels beside a fallen comrade, whispering, "Well, finish it, I promise." He rises, leading the charge. Each shot is more than survival. It's justice unfolding, one heartbeat at a time. Weeks later, Keller's unit pauses near a quiet farmhouse. The battle has slowed, but not ended. Keller writes a letter home, his rifle propped beside him, its barrel nicked and scarred. "To whoever built this," he writes, "know that your hands made more than metal. You made faith." He folds the letter and places it in his pocket, unsure if it will ever be sent. Outside, thunder murmurs over the horizon, promising another storm. Yet for now, the silence feels sacred, a brief truce between destruction and redemption. Summer fades. The war grinds onward, but the tide has turned for good. In Washington, military officials gather for a ceremony honoring the engineers behind America's war machine. John Garand stands on stage awkwardly as applause fills the room. He shakes hands, accepts a medal, but his eyes drift beyond the cameras. To the faces of soldiers he'll never meet, to the silent field of crosses growing overseas. As the applause fades, he whispers to himself, "May it never have to be built again." In that moment, under the glittering chandeliers of victory, the man who changed war prays only for peace. The war ends not with cheers, but with silence. Across the world, rifles fall quiet, their echo swallowed by the wind. In a small cemetery in France, Lieutenant Frank Keller kneels before a row of white crosses. His M1 Garand rests on the ground beside him, dirt and blood still clinging to its steel. Around him, survivors murmur prayers, voices trembling between grief and gratitude. He runs his hand along the rifle's barrel, eyes distant. "You did what you had to," he whispers, as if to both the weapon and himself. Above, gray clouds drift apart, letting sunlight spill across the graves. For the first time in years, he breathes without fear. Yet even peace feels heavy. Justice, it seems, always demands a price. Back in Massachusetts, John Garand walks the armory floor one last time. The machines are quieter now, their rhythm replaced by memory. Stacks of rifles sit untouched, awaiting peacetime orders that may never come. He runs his hand along the cold steel of a finished M1, tracing its lines like an old friend. The sound of footsteps breaks his thoughts. Colonel Haskins, older, slower, but smiling faintly. "We built something that mattered," he says. Garand nods. "We built something that ended." They stand in silence, two men bound by creation and consequence. Outside, spring sunlight pours through dusty windows, lighting the rows of sleeping rifles, symbols of both salvation and sorrow. At home, Eleanor pours tea as John sits near the window, the world outside bright and calm for the first time in years. He reads a letter from the War Department, an invitation to Washington for recognition. He folds it neatly, setting it aside. "You're not going?" she asks softly. He shakes his head. "They already said thank you. Every soldier who came home alive did." She smiles gently, placing her hand over his. "Then that's enough." The radio hums quietly, playing a slow orchestral tune. Outside, children laugh in the street, free and fearless. Garand listens to the sound, eyes softening, heart finally easing beneath the weight he carried for so long. Months later, Keller returns home. The train screeches to a halt under a sky that no longer feels like war. He steps onto the platform, duffel bag over his shoulder, his M1 Garand slung carefully in his arms. Families cheer, flags wave, but his eyes stay distant, drawn to faces of those who didn't return. A small boy tugs his sleeve, asking, "Mister, is that the rifle that won the war. Keller looks down, kneeling so their eyes meet. "No," he says softly, smiling through weariness. "It's the rifle that let us come home." He ruffles the boy's hair, walking away as the crowd swells behind him. The truth of victory, he knows, is quieter than parades. Night falls over Springfield. John Garand sits alone in his workshop for the last time, surrounded by the ghosts of invention. Blueprints, tools, fragments of a dream that changed the world. He holds one final rifle across his lap, polished, perfect. In its reflection, he sees not a weapon, but a mirror of humanity. Brilliance mixed with burden. He stands, placing it gently on the workbench, and turns off the lamp. The light fades, leaving only the shape of the rifle outlined in shadow. Outside, a gentle breeze rustles through the trees, carrying the faint echo of freedom. Justice, he thinks, isn't in the fight. It's in the courage to build something true. Years have passed. The armory now stands silent, its machines rusted, its echoes long faded. John Garand walks its empty halls, his footsteps soft against the dust of memory. Time has turned his work from tool to legend, his name whispered in museums and history books. Yet he feels no pride. Only the strange ache of purpose fulfilled and forgotten. He pauses where his bench once stood, running his hand across the worn wood. "You served your time," he murmurs to the ghosts of steel and smoke. Outside, distant church bells ring, the same rhythm that once matched his machines. The sound feels both familiar and final. For all his invention gave the world, it also took something from him. The belief that perfection could ever be free of consequence. At a small veterans event, Frank Keller sits among rows of soldiers turned civilians, their medals glinting softly under fluorescent lights. The speeches roll on, but Keller listens to the quiet between words. The coughs, the sighs, the memories, no one speaks aloud. He fingers the dog tag around his neck, feeling the weight of lives tied to his own. A young reporter asks, "What was it like? The rifle everyone talks about." Keller smiles faintly. "It wasn't the rifle," he says. "It was the men who held it." Around him, heads nod, eyes lower. They all know the truth. Tools don't make heroes. Courage does. At home, Eleanor tends the garden while John sits nearby, notebook in hand. The air smells of lilacs and rain. He sketches slowly, not rifles anymore, but bridges, simple machines, shapes of peace. "You're still inventing?" she teases gently. He smiles. "Only things that don't hurt anyone." She kneels beside him, dirt on her gloves, sunlight in her hair. "You always meant well, John." The world just caught up differently. He looks at her, eyes warm but tired. "Justice isn't perfect, Ellie. It's just the best we can build." Her smile fades into quiet agreement as the wind brushes through their small garden. A soft whisper, a forgiveness carried through time. A letter arrives from a museum requesting one of Garand's original rifles for a permanent display. The curator calls it a symbol of American courage. John reads it slowly, then sets it down. Later that evening, he retrieves a wrapped rifle from a chest, one of the first he ever built. He polishes it, tracing the initials carved faintly on its stock. JCG. His reflection stares back at him, older, softer, at peace. He whispers, "May you teach more than you ever destroyed." He places the rifle gently into its case, sealing it as if closing a chapter of his own life. The day of the museum unveiling arrives. A crowd gathers around the glass case, cameras flashing as officials speak of innovation, victory, and national pride. John Garand stands quietly at the back, unnoticed by most. The M1 rests beneath the lights, polished to perfection, its story frozen in silence. He watches as a young boy presses his hand against the glass, whispering, "Someday, I'll build something like that. Garand smiles faintly. In that simple moment, the echo of steel becomes something more. Hope renewed, truth reborn in new hands. He turns to leave, his reflection fading beside the rifle's gleam. Outside, the world hums forward, unaware that history's humblest hero just walked past them, smiling. Winter drapes Springfield in quiet snow. John Garand sits by the window, the fire low, his hands folded in reflection. The years have softened his sharp edges, but deepened his gaze. The world outside hums with peace built on the echoes of his labor. A letter rests on the table beside him, an invitation from the government, offering one last public honor. He smiles faintly, shaking his head. No more medals, he murmurs. The work was thanks enough. Eleanor hums softly from the kitchen, her voice carrying warmth through the still air. He watches snow fall past the glass, slow and forgiving. The weapon that changed the world now sleeps behind museum glass, and the man who built it finally feels at peace, knowing it will never be raised in anger again. Lieutenant Frank Keller visits the Springfield Museum with his grown son. He stops before the glass case that holds the M1 Garand. "This is it?" his son asks. Keller nods, eyes distant. "This saved my life," he says simply. His hand presses to the glass, the same way the boys once did years ago. It wasn't just a rifle. It was the difference between going home and never coming back. His son looks at him with quiet awe. "Did you ever meet the man who made it?" Keller shakes his head slowly. "No, but I think he built it for all of us." They stand together, silent, as the world moves around them. Two generations joined by the same truth. Courage doesn't end when the gunfire does. Back home, John Garand sits at his old workbench, now a shrine of quiet invention. The tools are still where he left them. He opens his notebook, the one filled with sketches and equations, and begins to write, not designs, but words. A letter to the next generation. Build with care. Create for peace. Let justice guide your hands. His handwriting shakes slightly, but every word holds purpose. When he finishes, he folds the paper neatly and places it inside the rifle's empty blueprint folder. He exhales deeply, the sound of a lifetime releasing. Outside, wind whistles through the trees like a faraway salute. Springfield years later. A small military funeral unfolds under gray skies. Soldiers stand in silent formation as a bugle calls its mournful song. Eleanor watches from beneath a black veil, holding the folded flag given in his honor. The world calls him the man who armed a generation, but she knows him as something simpler. A craftsman, a dreamer, a believer in fairness. When the rifles fire their salute, she doesn't flinch. The sound echoes across the hills, neither violent nor mournful, but resolute. A final note of justice for a man who never stopped building toward peace. Years later, inside the same museum, a plaque is added beside the M1 Garand display. John C. Garand, builder of truth. Visitors pass daily, unaware of the quiet man who once walked these halls. A janitor pauses to dust the glass, glancing at the rifle before moving on. The camera lingers on the reflection of sunlight sliding across the weapon's barrel. The voice of Garand drifts softly over the scene. Perfection means nothing without purpose. Justice, once built, must be protected by those who inherit it. The frame fades to the horizon beyond the museum windows. Bright, calm, endless. The hum of the world continues, guided perhaps forever by the steady rhythm of one man's belief.